Hey, Jesse Jackson. How you doing?
Off the lot, sir. Come on. Say hi and let's go.
Are you here to support us? You are? You've been marching all day long? We haven't seen you marching all day long. We haven't seen you. Hey, are you going to pay the bond of those brothers that's been locked up? You've been with the Brown family all day? What about the brother that filmed the Eric Garner murder? Are you going to post his bond?
Hey, you marching today with us, or you just gonna sit in the car?
Because we haven't seen you marching at all, Jesse.
You march, or you gonna sit in the
we
car?
Ain't seen you. When you gonna stop selling us out, Jesse? We don't want you here in St. Louis. When you gonna stop selling us out, Jesse? No, ain't no wait a minute, brother. This is real. We activists out here. We activists out here, brother. This is real. We don't want you here. You're not a leader. You're not a leader. We don't want you here, brother. Matter of fact, you're not even a brother. You could keep moving and get the brothers out of jail. That's what you could do.
I was at the trial in Memphis. I want to show you all quickly, explain to you why that jury of 6 blacks and 6 whites after 3 hours came back and found that white boy guilty of conspiring to kill Dr. Martin Luther King. And they went further than that. And they also said there was some co-conspirators, black folks, unnamed, that was involved. I want to show you a little 3-minute clip of the minister that Dr. King was going by his house for dinner. He was due at 7, but they had to move it up because 7 would be a little too dark to shoot somebody. So they moved it to 6 o'clock. 2 years ago at a press conference in Memphis, I get a call. And they said, so-and-so is thinking about killing so-and-so, so-and-so. I said, what? I said, well, he said something at a press conference. I said, put him on the phone. I said, whatever you do, get that film. Because once NBC realized what this brother had slipped and said, we will never get our hands on the film. What you're fixing to see now went into the evidence in the King trial where they brought a wrongful death suit, and I'll explain that to you quickly in a minute. But what you're fixing to witness now is the man who came by to get King to take him to dinner. And 30 years later at a press conference, he slipped because God do baffle your mind sometimes. You look,
some of the activities are geared especially for the young who did not have a chance to get the feel or to know what the civil rights movement actually was about. Even as they marched, now they could have stopped in a hotel, but when you think about marching from Memphis to Jackson or Jackson to Memphis, there were no hotels. You stayed in churches, you stayed in people's homes, and that's how we got over, that's how we got through. The struggle was a spiritual struggle. You couldn't pay people to do what we had to do. You couldn't pay people to stand before mad dogs and fire hoses and billy clubs and cattle prods. It was strictly a spiritual and moral movement. So we wanted that dimension to be in the pilgrimage to Memphis. We will revisit the mountaintop speech site. That's the Mason's Temple, where Dr. King made his last address, which he almost didn't make, because the night that we were having that rally, there were tornado warnings, and he was behind on the Poor People's Campaign. And he said, you guys go on over and have the rally. I'm going to stay at the motel and work on the Poor People's Campaign. When we got there and Dr. Abernathy walked in and Jesse Jackson walked in and I walked in and others, people started clapping because they thought Martin was behind us. And so Ralph's preacher said to him, this is not our crowd. And he went to the phone and called Dr. King. And that any of the marches that we had in those days, you have an opportunity to bring the children and bring the family and march with us. And when I finished sharing with them the last hour of Dr. King's life, a hurry. But that gave me the wonderful privilege of spending the last hour on earth. 3 preachers in a room, Abernathy, King, and Kyle. And we spent that last hour together in room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. The press is always curious, and writers, what went on? What did you talk about? I say, we just talk preacher talk. What preachers talk about when they get together.
Y'all pay real attention to what you're fixing to hear now.
About 5:45, we walked on the balcony, and he was talking to people in the courtyard. He stood here and I stood there. Only as I moved away, so we could have a clear shot, the shot rang out.
Thank you.
I turned around and then knocked him back on the balcony.
Listen. Oh. Wait, listen. Listen. 30 years later, this brother never realized he would slip and say that. Do you know what happened when you're sitting in a jury room about a conspiracy and this piece of film is introduced? He stood here, I stood here, only as I moved away so he could have a clear shot. The shot rang out. Hey. This was the brother that he was going by his house for dinner. Now, to my brother Matty, you will have a copy of this tape. I'll get it back to you. And what you should do is make copies. See to it, because this is a very valuable. And y'all need to send this tape to people all over this country. And so this was the trial that went on that the press didn't want to report because they couldn't. Huh? They couldn't. And so we have to stop getting mad and upset because the same system that's killing us refuse to tell us the truth. You have to use your own God-given intelligence. If we was all over in Germany today walking down the street and we see this big old building and it's named after Adolf Hitler, you don't have to be too smart to realize something evil is going on inside that building. Well, how come you don't understand that when you walk down in Washington, D.C. and see that big old brand new FBI building named after J. Edgar Hoover? How come we don't know something evil is going on inside that building?
It's a living, breathing thing, the Assumption Parish sinkhole. More than 200 days after it mysteriously began swallowing up the swamp, hundreds of residents are still under a mandatory evacuation order. As Katie Moore reports, the cavern that caused it is still collapsing, leaving Bayou Corn residents wondering if there will ever be an end in sight.
Bayou Corn has always been a peaceful place.
We could drop the boat right there and just take off to go fishing. It was just like a paradise.
But now it feels downright empty. Jamie Weber is gone. A sign on her old home says it's thanks to Texas brine. She had no idea that she was putting her mobile home on land on top of an underground salt dome, one full of caverns used to make brine or salt water, others used to store hazardous, potentially explosive gases. Geophysicists now say the western side of one of the brine caverns is collapsing, filling in from deep in the earth, causing the sinkhole at the surface to expand and contract.
On October 25th, We moved out of our home.
She and some of the 350 evacuated Bayou Corn residents packed a joint legislative hearing in Baton Rouge in recent days looking for answers. Many of the ones they keep getting are conflicting and confusing, especially from the state and the company that once mined the collapsing salt cavern, Texas Brine.
Senator, the cause of the sinkhole is the subject of pending litigation. At this point, I don't think it's proper to have any discussion about what the cause is and whether we accept what anyone has said regarding the cause of the sinkhole.
The cavern collapse led to the sinkhole and created a path for the natural gas and the crude oil to come to the surface.
That's Louisiana Department of Natural Resources Secretary Stephen Schutz. He slipped out a back door after the hearing without giving us the chance to ask him any questions.
The sinkhole is constantly changing. It changes every time we go out there.
Gary Hecox is an engineer consulting with DNR about what to do about the sinkhole. It's uncharted territory.
The cavern was 3,400 feet deep, which is deeper than any known cavern failure impacting the surface in the international record.
Meaning nowhere in the world has a brine cavern this large collapsed, and it's not finished yet.
We still have 450 feet to fill. How long is it going to take to fill this up? At 1 foot per day, we're looking at an ongoing event that's still going to run over a year.
Every time it shifts, recently installed seismic monitors pick up tremors like little earthquakes. When it does, big bubbles of natural gas, vegetation, and crude oil are released to the surface. They call it a burp.
It appears that the sand and gravel that's in the bottom of the sinkhole breaks up a large gas bubble into many small bubbles, just like an aquarium, and that is a good thing, because if you get a single bubble up and have an ignition source, you can have a flashover.
An explosion. Instead, those little bubbles are coming out all around the actual sinkhole site, with 20 new sites spotted in the last month. 9 months after the bubble sites first surfaced, Texas Brine started installing vent wells to alleviate the pressure underground. You can see some of them burning in 15 places around Bayou Corn.
We continue to install relief wells as fast as we can, and we'll keep doing so as long as they continue to be effective.
The problems in Bayou Corn aren't just ones you can see, but what you can't see. Take these guide wires, for example. During a recent rain, bubbles started coming up from around them. That's when residents knew the problems weren't just far off in the bayou.
A house acts like a tent, and so if it's migrating up through the soil and it's being caught in the house, it's building up concentrations in the house. And then if it reaches explosive level, then one little spark in the house would set it off.
Nick Romero now has 5 DEQ monitors installed in his house to measure natural gas and other chemicals.
We have had our grandkids, and now we can't. I love to fish, and now I don't want to.
They're struggling not just with the instability underground, but in their lives. Romero and some others haven't evacuated, but Weber did in October.
Once they told us that they wanted to put monitors in our house, and that we'd have to live like, to me, like lab rats. There was no way for my kids to grow.
And Weber says they feel forgotten, especially by Governor Bobby Jindal, who has yet to visit the sinkhole site or talk about it.
He's promoting plants around the area, chemical plants, and he was in the area and he wouldn't, still to this day does not acknowledge it.
In October and November, Jindal announced 2 chemical plant expansions a few miles from Bayou Corn, one in Geismar and one in Donaldsonville. But in 6 months, no visit to the sinkhole site.
Where is he? Where is Jindal? You know, he's all over the United States, but he can't come 40 minutes south of Baton Rouge and visit.
As these Environmental Action Network photos show, when the sinkhole first appeared, it was just 400 feet in diameter. So far, it's swallowed 9 acres. Scientists say the worst-case scenario is it could swallow 40 acres. Even if it does, many like...
We are talking today with Dr. Helen Caldicott. Dr. Helen Caldicott is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee and the founding president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, where she served in that position from 1977 to 1986. In addition to founding PSR, she is also the founding president of the STAR, standing for Truth About Radiation Foundation, founder of the Women's Action for Nuclear Disarmament, and founder of the Nuclear Policy Research Institute. Her articles have been published in numerous publications, and she is the author of 7 books, including Nuclear Madness, What You Can Do, Missile Envy, The Arms Race and Nuclear War, If You Love This Planet, A Plan to Heal the Earth, Nuclear Power is Not the Answer, and she is here to talk about her new book, of which she is the editor, Crisis Without End, The Medical and Ecological Consequences of the Fukushima Nuclear Catastrophe. Dr. Caldicott, thank you very much for coming and spending time with us today.
Thank you.
So to start out, tell us, what was your motivation in creating Crisis Without End?
I was appalled at the ignorance of the media reporting the Fukushima disaster, and it's ongoing. And they didn't seem to understand genetics or radiation biology or epidemiology or anything about radiation. So I thought, well, I'll hold a big symposium at the New York Academy of Medicine with the very best scientists in the world, oceanographers, evolution biologists, physicians, epidemiologists, and try and attract the media so we can educate them a bit. Well, you know, the New York Times didn't turn up. Matt Wald, who writes the nuclear articles, he was at something else, I think more a pro-nuclear conference. But it was broadcast around the world to, I think, 3,600 outlets. And out of it has come a book of the proceedings, which is really the first scientific analysis of what has been going on at Fukushima. Mind you, it's a year old now, but nothing has really changed. It's just getting worse.
In fact, we aired a lot of the talks from your symposium.
Right.
It was excellent.
Mm.
So for those that can't remember exactly, can you refresh people's memories on what happened on March 11th?
Well, there was a terrible earthquake in the Pacific near the east coast of Japan. It was a 9, and that's very big. And after followed a tsunami because the earth moved and the ocean moved up, and it was a very tall tsunami, 45 feet high, and it rushed in. And if you can remember the photographs of ships and people and cars and houses being swept far inland, and many, many people died. The Fukushima Daiichi plant was built at sea level. Actually, they excavated a cliff to build the plant lower at sea level. And the seawall they had was, I don't know, 12 feet high or something, and the tsunami totally flooded the Fukushima Daiichi plant. There were 6 reactors. 2 were not functioning, 3 were, and 1 was being reloaded. Now, to keep a nuclear power plant running with 100 tons of fissioning uranium in its core, you have to keep it cool consistently because enormous heat is produced, which of course is turned to steam, which turns a turbine, which generates electricity. So all a nuclear power plant does essentially is boil water. And as Einstein said, nuclear power's a hell of a way to boil water, and that's putting it mildly. So what happened was nuclear power plants must have external electricity supply to power the pumps to circulate the water at 1 million gallons a minute through the core. And of course, with the earthquake, tremendous damage was done and the external power supply was lost. However, they had a whole lot of huge diesel generators in the basement, the size of a house, which were powered, programmed to start immediately. The external power disappeared, but the tsunami flooded them, and so they were inoperative. And therefore, there was no cooling water. Therefore, within hours, three nuclear power plants started to melt down, and the 3 of them melted down within about 3 days. However, the Japanese government didn't tell anyone for 3 months. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission here in Washington was having conniptions, and if you read the transcripts of their discussions, I mean, they were terrified. Naoto Kan, who is the Prime Minister, who I now know, at the time was so alarmed that he was talking about having to evacuate Tokyo, 35 million people. It was just serendipity that it occurred on Friday afternoon and not at night, because there are over 1,000 people operating the Daiichi plant, and just down the coast is the Daini plant with 4 more nuclear power plants, and that was in trouble too. So they had their full staff. Had it been at night, probably they all would have melted down and Japan would have gone. As David Suzuki in Japan, he is in Canada, said it would be bye-bye Japan. And it still could be bye-bye Japan because it's a very earthquake-prone area. Some of the buildings are extremely fragile. There were 4 huge explosions, one of which was a nuclear explosion. They call it an excursion, but it was nuclear. And especially Building 3 is very fragile. It's still got a huge cooling pool on its roof, protected by nothing. The molten core has melted its way down onto the concrete of the containment vessel, but maybe into the earth. And if that collapsed, there would be a nuclear inferno. Building 4 is also similarly fragile, and it's got a huge cooling pool on top with all its fuel rods, but they have been removing them. And it's been a very delicate procedure, and they've removed almost all. So if that collapsed now, I think it would probably be okay. Meanwhile, there's a range of mountains to the west of the reactors, just close. And so mountain water pours down continuously beneath the reactors, and when they were intact, that was fine. But now with 3 molten cores containing the most ghastly, deadly radioactive elements like plutonium, americium, cesium, strontium, tellurium, you name it, is exposed to this water washing over it continuously, and the water is extremely radioactive. Meanwhile, they're having to pour seawater continuously into these 3 cores to keep them cool, and as it recirculates back, it's terribly radioactive too. So they're sucking out that particular water and putting it in huge tanks, about, 1,500 tanks, 3 stories high, held together with sort of plastic and corroding bolts and stuff. And those tanks contain, 360,000 tons or gallons, I can't remember the number, of extremely radioactive water. So if there's another earthquake, those tanks will collapse and all the water will pour into the Pacific. Meanwhile, the water submerging underneath the reactors coming from the mountains is pouring to the Pacific continuously. 300 to 400 tons per day have been pouring into the Pacific every day for 3.5 years since the accident. And so a lot of people say, well, it will become diluted. The Pacific's a huge body of water. However, the solution to pollution by dilution is fallacious when it comes to radiation because there's biomagnification in the food chain. So, for instance, cesium concentrates hundreds, thousands of times in the algae. The crustaceans eat the algae. It's concentrated by orders of magnitude in the crustaceans. Little fish, big fish, and then us. And fish swim thousands of miles. Of course, they swim anywhere they want. And so on the coast of California, about a year or 2 ago, they were catching tuna containing cesium from Fukushima. But it will get worse. And there's no end in sight. Nuclear engineers have no idea how to get to these radioactive cores. They're so radioactive that people would die if they got near them because the radiation is so intense. And, being a physician, prognosticating as I do with patients, prognosticating on this disaster, I don't think they'll ever remediate it, and it will continue, and the Pacific will get more and more radioactive. And, I live on the Pacific in a little fishing village in Australia, and we could easily be eating radioactive fish in a year or 2 or 3, and you can't taste radiation in your fish. You say, this tastes nice, this whiting, this tuna, but you can't taste, smell or see radioactive elements. And once they get into your body and deposit in various organs and concentrate in various organs, it takes 2 to 80 years to develop cancer, and that's the incubation time for cancer. So it's cryptogenic, silent. It's a silent killer, radiation. Whereas, if I cough on you, within 2 days you're coughing, you've got my flu or my cold. So that's the ace up the sleeve of the nuclear industry because it's so invisible. And when cancers occur, you then have to do epidemiological studies to secure the fact that, in fact, in this population, cancer has increased enormously, like they've done with Hiroshima and Nagasaki and lots of other situations.
So 300 to 400 tons of radioactive water per day, and I believe TEPCO's rosy prediction for when they're going to get things contained is 40 years out, but the rest of the experts don't seem to back that up.
Oh, Michio Kaku and, you know, the real physicists who know what's going on say there's no real solution. Arnie Gunderson, who actually worked for the nuclear industry for about 30 years as an engineer, he can't really see any solution at all. I mean, none of this is in their textbooks. And that's the thing with nuclear power. You know, Chernobyl happened, and don't forget that's in the Ukraine. And don't forget Russia and America are confronting each other in the Ukraine. Ukraine is still very radioactive. They've had a huge numbers of cancers and leukemias and the like. There are 15 reactors in the Ukraine still. You can't have a war, conventional war, in a country with nuclear power plants because they could well melt down. It's easy to melt down a reactor. As well as that, America and Russia still have their weapons on a very high state of nuclear alert. Well, it seems that they do. And, you know, this situation in the Ukraine could precipitate a nuclear war. But to get back to my main point, a stupid man in the middle of the night did a stupid experiment with Chernobyl, which was only operating for 3 months. And the thing exploded, burnt and melted down. And one stupid man with a nuclear reactor contaminated a continent, the whole of Europe and Britain. There are still farms in Wales and Britain with lambs that are so radioactive they can't be sold on the market. There are wild boars running around Germany so radioactive they almost glow in the dark and have to be buried in radioactive waste facilities. I mean, because what happens is as the cattle
Latin Amerika'nın İslam'la tanışması, dikkatinizi çekiyorum, 12. yüzyıla kadar dayanır. Amerika kıtasının 1492'de Kolomb tarafından keşfedildiği iddia edilir. Oysa Kolomb'dan 314 sene önce 1178'de Müslüman denizciler Amerika kıtasına ulaşmışlardı. 1178. Hatta Kristof Kolomb'un hatıralarında Küba kıyılarında dağın tepesinde bir caminin varlığından bahsedilmektedir. Ben şimdi Kübalı kardeşimle bunu konuşuruz. O dağın tepesine bir cami bugün de yakışır. Yeter ki böyle bir şeye müsaade etsinler. Yani Kolomb daha Amerika kıtasını keşfetmeden İslam dini kıtada inkişaf etmiş, yayılmıştı. Tabii burada çok önemli bir farkı da sizlerle paylaşmak isterim. Gerek Osmanlı Devleti, gerek diğer İslam ülkeleri, Latin Amerika ülkelerindeki tebliğ faaliyetlerini siyasi arzuların vasıtası olarak asla kullanmadılar. İslam dini asla ve asla sömürmenin, sömürgüleştirmenin, köleleştirmenin bir aracı olmadı. Başkaları daha iyi sömürmek için, daha kolay boyun eğdirmek için dinlerini bir araç olarak kullanırken Müslümanlar ve İslam devletleri sadece tebliğin peşinde oldular. Sadece gönülleri fethetmenin peşinde oldular. Sadece Allah'ın ismini yüceltmenin peşinde oldular.
Guatemalan archaeologists are making a fascinating discovery. Let's go to CNN's Brooke Baldwin. She traveled to Mirador and came back with an amazing story. Brooke, tell our viewers what's going on.
Wolf, I think I'm officially an archaeology geek. Our CNN crew, we're the first TV camera actually in the world to shoot the face of what may be the world's largest pyramid by volume. This pyramid, it is covered by the canopy of the jungle. It is currently facing several threats. From the air, it looks like just jungle, but these forests in Guatemala hide an ancient secret. The city of Mirador, often referred to as the cradle of Mayan civilization, the size of a modern-day metropolis. This is no mountain. It's a pyramid, and according to the Mirador Basin Project, it may be the largest pyramid by volume in the world. CNN is traveling with the project's director and lead archaeologist, Richard Hansen, and the founder of the Global Heritage Fund, Jeff Morgan.
The pyramidal Levante is a structure the world should know because it represents an investment of labor unprecedented in the world history. Every single stone in that building, from the bottom to the top, was carried by human labor.
And the work to save this pyramid is delicate, done by hand. Guatemalan archaeologists painstakingly help uncover pieces of history built by their ancestors. And the view from the top of La Danta, spectacular.
This is the summit of the Maya world.
Here at the top of La Danta, we are 72 meters, or about 224 feet, from the forest floor. And when we talk about sheer size of this area that is El Mirador, just one single Mayan city, archaeologist Dr. Richard Hansen says its size is larger than all of downtown Los Angeles, and he says there are still thousands of pyramids yet to be uncovered. Then Dr. Hansen shows us something few people have ever seen, a relic referred to as the Popol Vuh, the Mayan story of creation. Oh my gosh! CNN cameras are the first to capture this fresh discovery, which Hansen says will rewrite Mayan history. But this is the creation story.
This is the creation story, and it goes back to at least 300 to 200 BC.
For decades, historians believe the Popol Vuh was tainted by the Catholic views of Spanish conquistadors. Finding this frieze changes everything because it predates the Spanish arrival by more than a millennium. The challenge now is preserving this area, a jungle constantly under threat by narco-traffickers, loggers, and cattle ranchers. Hansen's guards are on constant standby to keep looters out.
Where we've had guards in cities throughout the basin, we've had no new looters' trenches. Where we haven't had the resources for that, we have lost 100%.
Hansen has made Mirador his life's work and hopes to share these Mayan secrets with Guatemala and the world.
The science for the sake of science is sterile if it doesn't bless the lives of people. And by conserving this, we're blessing the lives of an entire nation.
So, we go back, we can pick this story up in this timeline in ancient times, prehistorical times, in terms of official history, where there were, it would appear, two great civilizations which made together a global civilization, one based on a landmass which has become known as Atlantis, and one which has become known as Moor or Lemuria. And these were advanced, very advanced civilizations, with in many ways knowledge beyond what is available in the public arena today. And they went to great technological lengths, great understandings, for instance, in how you can create a magnetic field which then makes vast stones basically weightless, and you can push them along and maneuver them around. Great technological advancement, at least among the elite. These civilizations came to an end, it seems, with great cataclysmic events. It's interesting that when you've got studies which put together the ancient folklore around the world describing what the Bible calls the Great Flood, but that's just one version of the same recurring story in every ancient culture. And then you look at the geological and biological record of the Earth, the two correlate in terms of great cataclysmic events which cause fantastic geological upheavals. Of course, the story of Noah in the Bible, which is a rewrite of a much older Sumerian story, probably is mirrored, in fact is mirrored all over the world using different names for Noah. That is the most famous one of the Great Flood and the Great Cataclysms, but it is just one. The survivors of these advanced civilizations, and indeed before, moved out into other lands, and they took with them this advanced knowledge that was part of that once global society. But now these societies became isolated, and that original knowledge started to go its own way. Same knowledge, but it started to be expressed in different ways using different symbolisms, different tools, different names, etc. And this story is also why, when historians and others have gone into these places, like the Maya and South America and the Maya in Central America and other places, they were astounded when they first apparently discovered these civilizations, these groupings of people, that the same basic stories that they were telling, religious stories and other stories that they were telling in Europe, were being told by these other societies that apparently had no connection to Europe whatsoever, because we've just discovered you. While these original stories come from the original knowledge that's just got isolated. They're the original stories from the pre-historical times of the global society, the Golden Age, as some accounts call it.
It's one of the most remote places on Earth. A small triangle-shaped island in the Pacific Ocean where the closest landmass is almost 4,000 kilometers away. For over a millennium, it has been isolated from the rest of the world. But that would change on Easter Sunday, 1722, when a Dutch explorer on an expedition to Oceania encountered it by surprise. Today, Easter Island is home to fewer than 6,000 people, the majority of them descendants of the island's original inhabitants, the Rapa Nui. Most of us have seen their most famous creations, large monolithic statues depicting human faces. But many of us still don't know enough about this culture that has long fascinated anthropologists. This week, we focus exclusively on Easter Island and its people. Correspondent Stephen Gibbs visited the Pacific Paradise to better understand its past and explore its future.
Born from 3 volcanoes, this tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific has long been the symbol of near total isolation. The place where a unique society, alone in the world, developed, thrived, and nearly vanished. Until recently, it was a destination for just a handful of explorers who'd come to glimpse this mysterious relic of a recent Stone Age. But now Easter Island is within easy reach of scheduled airlines and tourists. It's just a 5-hour flight from Santiago in Chile, and there's at least 1 flight a day. Easter Island is in fact part of Chile, the only Latin American country to have a colony. The relatively easy connections and 0 tax rate here means that alongside the tourists, an increasing number of Chileans are also moving here permanently. And that raises a question: can this fragile environment and its original settlers survive the onslaught? Roberto is a man who has a foot in both Easter Island's past and its future. He is Rapa Nui, descended from the original settlers of this island. He makes his living these days running a thriving tourist restaurant in the one and only town, Hangaroa. He buys his produce from 2 distinct places: the local market, where he speaks the native language, also called Rapa Nui, and the modern Chilean-run supermarket, which sells imported products. As an example of one problem of being a Rapa Nui man in a modern world, Roberto takes us to see the ancestral land where he says at least 6 generations of his family once lived. The Chilean government is currently attempting to formalize land titles amongst all Rapa Nui people. Traditionally, a pile of stones was how land was demarcated. But a couple of years ago, Roberto thought he'd make things clearer by fencing off an area he thought was his. He was then told by the courts that another Rapa Nui man had already been awarded the land. That moment, he says, he decided he had to adapt.
It is very sad for a Rapa Nui person who wants to return to the home of his ancestors that they tell you that now, according to Chilean law, no, this land is not yours. It belongs to someone else. I think that other Rapa Nui are wrong because they now think like the people of the mainland. They think that if the government gives them land, all is good. But me, thinking as a real Rapa Nui, I think that's not good because it is not their land to hand out.
I'm going to try to get through all these images in about 5 minutes. There's a famous museum in Paris. It is called the Musée d'Odyssée. It has a Moor statue in it, and that's the one you're looking at right here. And here is a different angle of the same statue, and there's another. These people are described as Moors. Here's another image of a Moor that you will find in Europe. Here is a Moorish flag. Notice the way they are depicted as black. Notice the headbands. Here's another image in Europe of a black Moor. And here is another statue. The four gentlemen at the bottom are the Moors. The man at the top was one of the Christian conquerors. That was a statue in Livonia. It is called Plaza de Cuatro More. That means the four Moors. Okay, and there you have that image again. Here's another one. It's called an old statue of an African man, Moor. There it is. He is a black man. He's an African man. He's described as a Moor. He's not white. Here's another. It's called it's various statues here. This one that is called Moor is the only one that they went out of the way to carefully depict it as black. Black. Okay, here's another one. Clearly Negro. This is in the Netherlands. This is the Lemurian. It equals the Moor. It's an age-old icon of hotels, drugstores, and pharmacies all over the Netherlands. If the Moors were anything other than black, why are they going out of their way to depict them as clearly Negro in appearance? That's because that's what they were, even though there were non-black Moors. The Eurocentrists want to sway you by making you think that the black Moors were the minority, when in fact they were the majority. And they were the ones to basically civilize Europe, and that's what they have a problem with. Here's another statue. These statues are referred to as Moors. This is the famous statue we just referred to as the four Moors. There are several statues with that title. All of them depict Negroes. Negro, these are black people. Look at the lips, look at the hair. A fool can see that they are Negroes. Here's another famous statue. It is called the Four Moors as well. There's an interesting story behind this, and that is that these Negroes were actually models. They were slaves, and there are two slaves that were used to craft this particular statue. And they were promised their freedom if they would pose for this statue, but they're not portraying slaves. That's what the Eurocentrists would like for you to believe. They are portraying Moors. That's why the statue is called the Four Moors, okay? Because this was done after the fact. It's celebrating a time when basically these Moorish pirates basically invaded, and this was the white person, the leader who conquered them, okay? So these were not slaves that were captured. These were Moors that were captured, and that's what this depicts. And to deny this is displaying remarkable stupidity, ignorance, and a lack of knowledge. And of course, the Eurocentrists are going to do it anyway. Here are Moorish leaders. These are not slaves, as the Eurocentrists would like you to believe. That why would they be given such place of regal attire and honor if that was the case? Here is another Moor, which is also in the museum, also portrayed as black. In that same museum in Paris, they all are for the most part. And there goes some more. Now you can find some images of non-black Moors, of course, and you can certainly find images of lighter-skinned Moors because of the interbreeding that was done. This one is called a sultan with a tiger. Do you know what a sultan is? This is a sultan, and he is not white. This is a black man. This is a Negro, and here are four Moors as well. Okay, there's history behind that, and they want to tell you that the people that invaded were Berbers, but see, they're trying to Shanghai the term Berber just like they are Moors and everything else. Modern Berbers, these are ancient Libyans known as Lebu Meshwesh and later as Moors. These are Negroes, and well, that's another story there. That's another thing they've hijacked, but we're not going to deal with that right now. Here is a famous image as well of a Moor. And here are some more. This is called the bust of a sheik. Not slave, these are sheiks. That's what this is. This is a sheik. That's the title of this. Bust of a sheik, also in Europe. All of these images are in Europe. Another Negro there. Here's the four Moors as well. Here's a crest, a Corsican flag, actually. These are depicted as Caucasian. This is a Negro. Corsican flag. It's still there today. Here's a Moor's head, also a Negro. This is the famous bar. This is a bar where people go and basically get drunk. Moor's head, free house. Also Negro. Look at the crown. That's because they were the leaders. Here are Moors as well that have been captured. And these again, this is called the Fontana for More, meaning the four Moors, the Moorish fountain. Here it is again, clearly Negro. There you go. Fontana de Quattro Mori. There it is, black. And again, Fountain of the Four Moors. And there you have it again, Fountain of the Four Moors. These are also this totally different statue. Those are black as well. Here we have again the same Negroes. Crest of Coburg in Germany, also black Moors. And here you have the flag of Sardinia, black. There you have it again and again and again. Always Negroes, because that is, in fact, predominantly, there you go, Moors, black. That's what they were.